The sun had barely cleared the skyline when the luxury vehicles began to glisten in the lot of Sanderson Motors, a high-end dealership nestled in a wealthy Atlanta suburb, where appearances were everything and assumptions came easy. Behind the gleaming showroom, past the polished glass offices and espresso machines, the service bay smelled of engine grease and sweat. This was the real heart of the place, humming with labor, clanking with tools, and echoing with the low grumble of expensive engines under maintenance. Eli Thompson had been working since dawn. Dressed in plain navy blue coveralls, a cap pulled low over his brow, he looked no different from any other technician on the floor. His hands were deep in the engine of a 2022 Escalade, forearms stained with oil and patience. There was a kind of grace to his movements, not flashy, not rushed, just deliberate, efficient. He wasn't there to impress. He was there to observe. The employees didn't know who he really was, that the man covered in grease and wearing work boots had signed their paychecks, that the so-called new mechanic they mostly ignored was in fact the owner of Sanderson Motors and 4 other dealerships across the state. But Eli never cared much for titles or suits. Today, like many others before it, he had slipped into the rank and file unnoticed, not out of secrecy, but out of necessity. Because the truth of a place, he believed, always showed itself when power wasn't watching. And today, the truth was showing itself fast. From across the garage, he felt it, a shift in air. The subtle stillness when someone walks into a room thinking they own it. It was Mark Ridley, the dealership's general manager. Mark walked like a man auditioning for a promotion he thought he already deserved. Polished shoes, expensive watch, a smug confidence that came not from competence, but from comfort, the kind that came easy when you were born into it. He didn't look twice at Eli. To him, the man bent under the Escalade's hood was just another faceless laborer, just another black mechanic, probably hourly, probably temporary. And just like that, the hierarchy snapped into place, invisible but loud, unspoken but undeniable. Eli felt it the moment Mark's eyes brushed past him like dust. And still, he said nothing. He just kept working, letting the moment marinate, quiet, observant, unmoved. He'd seen men like Mark before. He'd hired some. He'd fired more. But today, he was just watching, listening, measuring the distance between how people pretended to lead and how they really treated those beneath them. And Mark? Mark was showing his cards early. The rhythm of the shop was its own kind of music. The ratcheting of tools, the low hiss of compressed air, the occasional clink of a dropped bolt bouncing across concrete. But above it all came something discordant, something sharper. It was the sound of authority misused. Mark Ridley paced the garage like a man inspecting livestock. His blazer remained spotless, even in the dust of the service bay, like he believed dirt was for other people. Every step he took left behind a residue of superiority. He looked at engines without understanding them. He looked at men like Eli without seeing them. He wasn't there to help. He was there to be seen helping. And when he stopped near Eli, it wasn't curiosity. It was challenge. Eli kept working. He knew the game, knew the need some men had to reassert control whenever it wasn't explicitly handed to them. He'd seen it before, the performative authority, the need to prove dominance in spaces they didn't truly own. But that didn't make the next part any easier. It started with the tone, that familiar clipped condescension, the kind reserved for people someone had already decided were lesser. Mark spoke to Eli like a man speaking to someone who didn't belong, a tone shaped not just by rank, but by race. The jabs were subtle at first. Comments about the truck Eli drove, where it was parked, then about his appearance, his hands, his attitude, the coded language of everyday prejudice, dressed up in workplace etiquette. Eli endured it all without lifting his eyes. He wasn't passive. He was calculating. Every insult logged, every glance noted, every assumption filed away like evidence in a case not yet opened. The junior mechanics nearby went quiet. They'd seen Mark like this before. Quick to scold, slow to praise, always talking down. But today was different. Today, the man absorbing it didn't push back. That made them uneasy. Because there was something about Eli, the calm in his stance, the confidence that refused to flinch, that made his silence feel louder than shouting. By mid-morning, Eli had finished the Escalade. Flawless work, as always. Not that anyone thanked him. He washed his hands slowly in the corner sink, the grease bleeding into the drain like old habits. He watched the water swirl, then turned off the faucet and dried his hands on a worn rag. He could feel Mark watching him again, still judging, still blind, still certain he was speaking down to someone beneath him. Eli folded the rag, set it down, and turned toward the showroom. He wasn't going to reveal himself yet, but the curtain, it was about to lift. Eli stepped through the side door, leading from the service bay to the glass-encased showroom. The contrast was striking. Gone was the scent of oil and hot engines, replaced by the sterile aroma of lemon-scented polish and espresso machines no mechanic ever touched. The space gleamed. Bright floors, chrome desks, wide glass windows meant to project success. A few salespeople glanced up as Eli passed, unsure if they should stop him. They didn't recognize his face, but something in the way he walked made them hesitate. He didn't look lost. He didn't look like someone who needed directions. He looked like someone who belonged. But belonging is a strange thing. It makes people nervous, especially when it defies expectation. He didn't go to the front desk, didn't ask for permission, just moved past displays of glossy brochures and promotional banners until he reached the executive stairs, the ones few staff ever used, the ones that led to the second-floor offices where real decisions were made. Behind him, Mark finally noticed. From the edge of the showroom, the manager frowned, stepping out from a huddle of salespeople. He watched Eli, puzzled, calculating. What was the mechanic doing up there? Mark followed, shoes clicking sharply across the showroom floor. But by the time he reached the base of the stairs, Eli was already halfway up, his broad frame calm, composed, and perfectly at ease, as if he had walked that path 100 times before. Because he had. Upstairs, the air was cooler, quieter. The walls held framed newspaper clippings, certificates of excellence, a few awards bearing the dealership's name. One door at the end of the hall stood out. Wide, dark wood, frosted glass, etched with elegant gold lettering, Executive Office, Corporate Owner. Mark stopped cold at the top step. He didn't move. Couldn't. He watched in stunned silence as Eli reached into his coveralls and pulled out a small leather case, the kind no technician carried. Inside, an ID badge. Name, Eli Thompson. Title, CEO, Thompson Automotive Group. He waved it in front of the access scanner. The door unlocked with a soft click. Eli stepped inside, casually, and closed the door behind him. Mark stood frozen. A crack had just formed, not in the floor, but in the foundation of his ego. He'd barked orders at a man he thought was beneath him. He'd humiliated the owner of everything around him. And worse, the man never raised his voice, never warned him, never even flinched. He simply walked upstairs and left Mark drowning in the echo of his own arrogance. The hallway outside the executive office had never felt so long. Mark stood at the top of the stairs, heartbeat in his ears, sweat rising at his collar. He stared at the door he had seen so many times but never truly noticed. It had always been just another office, until now. Inside was the man he'd insulted, dismissed, humiliated. Not just a mechanic, not just a new guy. The owner. Mark's throat went dry. He tried to replay the morning in his mind, hoping he could edit out the worst parts. But memory is cruel when it holds a mirror. Every smug command, every sideways comment, every sneer, they all played back unfiltered now. And just when he was about to turn and slink away, the door opened. Eli stood there, not angry, not smug, just composed. Mark, come in. The tone was neutral, but the authority in it left no room for refusal. Inside, the office was warm and minimal. No towering desk, no gold plaques shouting power. Just a space that felt earned, not staged. Mark stepped in slowly. Eli was already seated behind the desk, sleeves still rolled up, a faint smudge of oil still on one knuckle. He hadn't changed, hadn't tried to look corporate. That, in itself, was the power move. Mark sat stiffly across from him. Silence lingered. Eli let it. He looked at Mark the way a surgeon looks at an x-ray, calmly, deeply, as though he wasn't angry, just disappointed by what had been revealed. "So," Eli finally said, voice calm, "you don't recognize who's been signing your paychecks all year." Mark tried to answer, but his words collided with shame and got stuck halfway. "No excuses," Eli said. "I don't want an apology. I want you to hear something." He reached into the drawer and placed a small manila folder on the desk. Inside, printouts, complaints, HR reports, turnover data. "I've been hearing about this location for months," Eli continued, "about the culture, the turnover, the way junior staff are treated." He tapped the folder. "I came to see it for myself, and I saw it." Within an hour, Mark stared, color draining from his face. "You thought I didn't belong because of how I looked, because of what I wore, because I didn't walk in here announcing who I was. And you treated me exactly the way you treat people you think can't fight back." Another pause. This time it felt heavier. Eli leaned forward. "You run this place like you inherited it. I built it, from the bottom up. I've done every job in this building, and I still can, better than most." Mark shifted in his seat, the weight of consequence creeping in. "I'm not firing you," Eli said at last, a breath of false relief. "Not yet." He continued, firm but fair. "You're going to stay, and you're going to earn the job you thought you already deserved. You're going to rebuild trust. You're going to treat every man and woman on that floor with the respect they've earned. Or the next time we talk, it will be your exit interview. Silence. No yelling, no revenge. Just consequences. Quiet and absolute." Eli stood, ending the meeting. Mark stood too, smaller now somehow. As he walked out, the door clicked shut behind him like a final gavel. By noon, the dealership had changed. Not on paper, not in title, but in energy. The kind of change you feel before you understand. Whispers moved faster than sales leads. Technicians traded looks between oil changes. Sales reps lowered their voices near the showroom entrance. The front desk staff glanced toward the executive stairwell with new curiosity, even a touch of awe. The rumor was simple. The new mechanic is the owner. Most didn't believe it at first, but then Jamal, a young tech with only 2 months on the job, said he'd seen the badge, said the guy in coveralls walked straight into the boss's office like he'd built the place, said Mark followed him like a kid summoned to the principal. And that's when the silence broke. Respect shifted, not just toward Eli, but toward themselves. Because if the man who owned it all looked like them, walked like them, worked like them, then maybe they didn't have to shrink anymore. In the break room, tension gave way to reflection. Several techs, black, Latino, white, replayed how they'd seen Mark treat staff over the years. The sarcastic tone, the dismissive waves, the public corrections meant to humiliate. "He used to talk to Tyrone like he was a dog," someone muttered. "He always called people you, never by name," another added. And now? He was walking quieter, slower, like the ground was less certain under his feet. Because it was. Downstairs, Eli had returned to the service bay. He hadn't changed out of his coveralls. He leaned into the hood of another vehicle like it was just another Tuesday, sleeves rolled, hands busy, eyes steady. He didn't want praise. He wanted culture, and culture didn't change from the top. It changed within. So he let the day go on. Let the eyes watch him. Let the gears turn in more than just engines. He wasn't putting on a show. He was setting a standard. And the staff? They felt it. They stood a little straighter, spoke with more confidence, and looked at each other differently. Not as cogs, but as contributors. Friday afternoon brought the weekly sales meeting. It was usually a formality: half-hearted updates, overused buzzwords, forced laughter. A performance for corporate that rarely meant much to the people who kept the place running. Most techs didn't attend. It was for the front-of-house types: sales, finance, and, always, Mark. This Friday, though, the room filled up fast. Not because of a meeting invite, because of what had happened. Word had spread. Eli was the real boss. And now, he was attending the meeting. The room was sleek and modern: polished floors, chrome chairs, fake ferns. Eli stood near the window, arms folded, still in his coveralls. Not to prove a point, simply because he had nothing to prove. Mark stood at the front of the room, shoulders square, voice tighter than usual. His smile was forced. His jokes landed flat. The usual rhythm of the meeting stuttered under the weight of his mistake, and the knowledge that everyone now knew it. Then Eli stepped forward. No formal announcement, no spotlight. Just a shift in the air. He looked around the room, his presence anchoring it. Calm, grounded, powerful, not in volume, but in authenticity. He spoke plainly. Not about himself, not about the insult, but about vision. He talked about how the business should feel like family, not the word on the wall in break rooms. The real kind. The kind where you hold people accountable but lift them up, where no one's too important to get their hands dirty, and no one's too invisible to be heard. He didn't mention Mark once, but everyone felt it, because Eli wasn't here to shame. He was here to build, and in doing so, he held a mirror up to the entire culture, letting everyone see themselves in it. Even Mark. At the end of the meeting, silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, one technician clapped, then another. Then, the room. Not applause for a title, for a truth that had just walked in and stayed. Eli nodded once, a man of few words and 1,000 impacts. Then he turned and left the room, same pace, same stride. And Mark? He stayed behind, quiet, humbled, staring at the empty space Eli had just left behind. Not because it was a power move, but because he finally understood what real leadership looked like. Weeks passed, but the echo of that Friday afternoon didn't fade. It grew louder in the choices people made, in how they spoke to one another, in the atmosphere of Sanderson Motors itself. Something had shifted. Not in the name on the door. That had always been Eli's. Not in the title on the org chart. He'd owned that too. What changed was perception. Now, everyone saw him. Not just as a man who signed the checks, but as someone who had earned the ground he walked on. As someone who led not from a pedestal, but from the floor, the same floor where engines clanked and sweat-stained uniforms. The mechanics began to speak up more. The newer techs asked more questions. The senior staff taught with more patience. Because when leadership walks in coveralls, others realize they don't have to wear a suit to be seen. Mark, too, had changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. He listened more. He micromanaged less. He stopped using clipped tones and started learning names. For the first time in years, he was learning how to lead. Not through intimidation, but through humility. One afternoon, Eli saw Mark in the garage, helping a tech organize supply orders, something he never would have done a month before. They didn't exchange words. They didn't need to. The silence carried something heavier than apology: growth. Eli continued to visit, sometimes suited, sometimes in work boots. He liked it that way. He didn't need walls to know where he stood, and neither did his staff. He began implementing new programs, mentorship initiatives, internal promotions, updated equipment. But none of it came with press releases or grand speeches. Because real change, Eli knew, doesn't announce itself. It works quietly, like a wrench under a hood, like trust, rebuilt one bolt at a time. And so, the man they once saw as just a mechanic became something more powerful, a symbol, not of vengeance, of possibility, that you could come from the garage floor and end up owning the whole building. That leadership wasn't about who spoke the loudest, but who listened the deepest. That sometimes the person who gets overlooked is the one who built the entire foundation.